Serena Tolson and her friend Israel spent the evening of January 23, 2012 together, as they did practically every day that year. The young couple didn't notice how the deep night descended. Sitting at a picnic table in the local park, they heard a scream. It couldn't have been playful children, after all, it was 2:30 in the morning. When the piercing scream repeated, Serena and Israel rushed in the direction it came from. The scene that unfolded before their eyes resembled the bloodiest horror movie. Right in the middle of the road, a man hovered over a girl, relentlessly stabbing her with a knife again and again. Serena ran towards the man and shouted for him to stop. Israel pushed the attacker away from the girl, but while Serena was dialing the emergency hotline, the man jumped up and ran back to his car. He stepped away from it, holding an even larger knife in his hands. The man chased after the two. Serena and Israel scattered in different directions, but when Serena turned around, she realized that he wasn't running after her, he was returning to his victim to finish what he had started. The girl witnessed him thrusting the large knife into her, and the sound it made as it entered the victim's body robbed Serena of hope to help her, her ability to speak. She informed the operator that the girl was dead. Meanwhile, the man approached his car, calmly got inside, and drove away. Melissa Dom was born in Clearwater, Florida. It's a popular resort city known for its pristine white beaches. Melissa was the youngest child in her family and grew up surrounded by the love of her parents and older siblings. She never had any problems. She excelled in her studies because she wanted to make her parents proud. Striving for independence and self-sufficiency, she got a job at Dairy Curl to pay for her own insurance, gas, and other expenses. Dairy Curl was a popular spot where everyone stopped before heading to the beach to buy ice cream. Melissa loved working there because the cafe was close to home, and her friends would often visit her there. It was at Dairy Curl that Melissa first noticed Robert Burton. He attended the same school as Melissa but was several years older than her. Robert captivated the girl with his charming and affable nature. He was very kind and tender. Despite appearing to be quite different from each other, the young couple wanted to spend more and more time together. Melissa was outgoing and lively, enjoying hanging out with friends, while Robert didn't particularly enjoy those gatherings. Furthermore, while Melissa grew up in a close-knit family, Robert felt uncomfortable in the presence of his own relatives. His mother remarried, and he gained stepbrothers, which made him feel like an outsider in his own home. As a result, he spent more and more time with Melissa's family. The first alarm bell in their relationship rang when Melissa learned that Robert hadn't quit smoking as he had promised her. He apologized and promised that he wouldn't deceive her anymore, but it made Melissa uncomfortable that she had been misled for so long. Tension arose between them, which only intensified when Robert convinced her to give up her dream of attending a prestigious university where she had been accepted. Melissa assured those around her that it was her decision not to leave the town, but in reality, it was all because of Robert. When she found a part-time job at the hospital, still cherishing her dream of becoming a nurse like her mother, Robert spent all his time with her, hindering her work. If she tried to delicately explain to him that her shift had just begun, he would create scenes, portraying her as the guilty one and convincing her that she was the cause of their constant arguments. Being essentially a teenager, Melissa didn't understand that Robert's behavior was abnormal, and believed that all relationships were like that. In the spring of 2011, Melissa's sister invited her to relax on the beach with friends. One of the guys, by the way, mentioned Melissa's ex-boyfriend, which clearly didn't sit well with Robert, and as they were returning to the parking lot, he started behaving like a child, stepping on her shoes from behind. The young man knew she was not at fault but clearly wanted to vent his anger on her. Melissa knew he wouldn't stop and tried to break free from him, running ahead. When she reached a small hill, she turned around and demanded that he stop this childish behavior, but without saying a word, he pushed her from the elevation. The girl tumbled down the hill and got scratched up badly. Her friends rushed to her cries for help. However, Instead of running to Melissa, Robert headed towards the others and claimed that she had fallen. Melissa complained that he had pushed her, to which Robert called her a liar. It is unclear how the argument would have ended if Melissa's older sister hadn't intervened and taken her home. She believed that the young couple should not be left alone. Upon learning about the incident, Melissa's mother demanded that her daughter break up with him, and the girl seemed to agree. However, to her surprise, Robert showed up at her house again after 2 weeks. After this incident, everything changed in their relationship. Melissa wanted to break up with him but couldn't because he threatened to do something terrible to himself. On October 25, 2011, Melissa and Robert were again spending time with friends. Apparently, Melissa felt braver than usual because when Robert demanded that she go get cigarettes, she refused. The young man became visibly upset, snatched her car keys, and insisted they go together to the gas station store. Sensing a storm brewing, Melissa quietly asked the guys to follow them in their cars. Robert noticed this maneuver and started questioning whether Melissa had said anything to them. She denied it, of course. But he couldn't calm down, and later, when they returned home and Melissa braked on the driveway, he started throwing her bag, keys, and phone all over the street. The girl yelled at him to stop, and then he struck her in the face. Robert lunged at Melissa with clear intentions of beating her, but she managed to hit him in the groin, get up, and run away. The girl remembered where he had thrown her phone. She grabbed it and dialed 911. However, when it was time to press the call button, she hesitated. After all, Robert always said he would kill her if she ever complained about him to anyone. But when she turned around, she saw that he was only 2 steps behind her. That gave her courage. She dialed the number and reported the attack to the emergency operator. She ran towards the intersection where the gas station was located, but looking back, she realized he wasn't chasing her. Suddenly, she thought that he knew where he had thrown her keys. He would go to her house and kill her mother, as he always threatened. Robert knew how important Melissa's mother was to her, and it was his main tool for manipulating her. Fearing for her mother, Melissa rushed back when Robert suddenly jumped out from behind the bushes. He grabbed her, and he probably would have severely beaten her, but at that moment, a patrol car pulled up. Incredibly, Robert angrily shouted at Melissa, "So you really want to do this to me? You want me to get arrested?" The girl couldn't believe he was blaming her for what had happened. Still under Robert's influence, the girl began to plead for him not to be arrested but to be sent to anger management classes or something similar instead. However, the officers explained to her that everyone had witnessed the incident, and they would arrest him regardless of her words. The police officers escorted her home and had a conversation with her and her mother about domestic violence, explaining that victims often return to their abusers and they didn't want the same thing to happen to her. Robert was arrested and charged with assault. However, the very next morning, after spending only 6 hours in jail, he called Melissa and demanded that she drive him home. Fortunately, she refused. The trial of Robert was scheduled for January 23, 2012. Melissa didn't need to be present at the trial, so she spent a pleasant weekend with her friends. She was slowly returning to her normal life, and preparing for her upcoming exams. But in the middle of the night, while she was peacefully sleeping, the phone rang. It was Robert. Melissa ignored the call, but he called again. She answered reluctantly. Robert told her that he was nearby her house. He was crying and pleaded for a final farewell meeting, saying that they shouldn't part on such a sour note, and he just wanted to hug her one last time. Reluctantly, the girl agreed, grabbed her phone, keys and pepper spray, thinking she could handle the situation. But as soon as she stepped outside, she realized it was a huge mistake. Unfortunately, Robert had already spotted her, and the girl felt too embarrassed to turn back. She hoped she could quickly say goodbye to him and then return to bed to get some sleep before her exam. Approaching her, the young man tightly embraced her, and at that moment she heard a click. His pocket knife was revealed. He struck her with tremendous force, hitting her shoulders, face, and throat. Melissa screamed and fought desperately for her life when suddenly a girl emerged from the darkness, demanding him to stop. Melissa didn't know this girl but reached out to her hand, not knowing how she could help. She saw a phone in her hands and hoped that she would call for help. At the same time, Serena, for that was her name, told Israel to push the attacker away from the girl, and he did. Rising up, Robert calmly walked toward his car. Serena approached Melissa, and was about to take her hand when suddenly Robert chased after them. The girl was terrified, thinking she would become his second victim. While running, she dialed 911 and reported the attack, but when she turned around, she saw that the man had returned to the bloodied girl lying on the ground to finish what he started. Serena was certain that the girl was dead. In reality, Melissa was still conscious but had no doubt that Robert would run her over with his car, and it would all be over. Officer Melissa Harris of the Clearwater Police sat in her patrol car that night, doing paperwork when a radio message came through about a crime. She was informed that a dead girl was lying on the side of the road on the north side of the park, and the man who attacked her had fled the scene in a red pickup truck. However, when she arrived at the scene, she found no one. She slowly searched the park, not understanding what was happening. Melissa was sure that Robert knew help was near and would have to finish everything quickly. She crawled, doing everything in her power to get off the road, and he wouldn't be able to run her over with his car. There were two large piles of cement near her neighbor's mailbox. She realized that if she could crawl there, the mailbox and the cement would protect her. At some point, she even managed to stand up. Reaching the mailbox, the exhausted girl fell into the dirt and heard his car simply drive away slowly. It became very quiet. Melissa was convinced she was dying. She prayed for forgiveness of sins when a spotlight from a police car illuminated her. Officer Melissa Harris admits that in all her years of police service, she had never seen anything like it. The victim was covered in wounds, her teeth were knocked out, and many of her wounds continued to bleed heavily. Nonetheless, she was able to tell Melissa not only her own name but also Robert's name, his address, date of birth, and the make of his car. She even spelled out his last name to eliminate any doubts about the identity of the perpetrator. After providing all the information, the girl whispered that she could now leave, but the arriving medics prevented her from closing her eyes, realizing that if she did, she might not wake up again. While they desperately tried to treat Melissa's most severe wounds, her mother woke up the police officer who was already at their home following the previous attack on the girl. He asked the woman to accompany him because her daughter had been attacked. She was certain that the police had mistaken the door and said that Melissa was upstairs sleeping, but the officer hurried her along, and she understood that he wanted her to see Melissa before it was too late. Melissa's condition worsened with each passing second. It was evident that she needed to be transported by helicopter. Firefighter Cameron, who also arrived at the scene, suggested using the football field as a landing spot. He jumped over the fence and set up signal cones, marking the landing zone. Within minutes, Melissa was brought on a stretcher. She was in critical condition and no one believed she would survive, but as Cameron watched the helicopter depart, he somehow felt confident that he would see her again. On the operating table, Melissa teetered on the brink of death several times. Her heart struggled to pump the blood that was simply lacking in her body. Therefore, the doctors tried to stop the bleeding on one hand while transfusing blood on the other. After 3 hours, she showed signs of life, weakly squeezing the surgeon's hand. Only then did the exhausted medical team take a break and allow both themselves and the patient to rest. In the morning, it was reported over the police radio that Robert had been seen in the city. He stopped at a store and bought a lot of water, presumably to wash off Melissa's blood. Then he purchased sleeping pills at Walmart and stopped at McDonald's to have a meal. After that, his car was found crashed into a store. The young man was found behind the wheel in an unconscious state. The car continued running for so long that the wheel created a hole in the ground, after which the vehicle caught fire. The guy was taken to the hospital, where he was shocked by the news that his victim had survived. Initially, Robert insisted on his innocence, claiming that he wasn't himself. However, when the psychiatric examination confirmed that he was not insane and a court date was set, he unexpectedly confessed his guilt. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Melissa spent 3 weeks in the hospital. She had to learn how to walk, speak, eat, and even close her eyes all over again. After fully recovering, Melissa was invited to speak at a violence victims center. She was very nervous but couldn't help but notice 2 young firefighters sitting in the front row, listening to her every breath. It turned out that Chief Cameron had called them and informed them that Melissa would be speaking nearby, suggesting they surprise her. When Cameron saw Melissa, he couldn't believe that she was the same girl he helped rescue in the helicopter. Cameron introduced himself to Melissa and invited her and her mother to have a celebratory lunch at their fire station. From that day on, the young people were practically inseparable. Despite Melissa being convinced that she would never date anyone again, Cameron restored her love for life. When she was invited to ceremoniously open a baseball game sometime later, Cameron ran up to her and handed her a ball with the words, "Will you marry me?" Melissa, of course, said yes, and the smitten couple got married in 2017. Melissa became a lawyer advocating for the rights of violence victims, and her main advice is to never date an ex-partner after a relationship breakup. She herself didn't realize how dangerous it could be. She had come close to death and believes she survived to take on the important responsibility of helping young women who believe they don't deserve true love and respect.